Welcome, readers, viewers, and listeners to another episode of the Pewter Report Podcast. For the first time, I'm your host, Paul Atwal, already butchering the intro, joined today by a very special guest, a co-host of one of my favorite podcasts, Seattle Overload, a must-follow for anyone who wants to learn more about X's and O's, regardless of if you're a Seahawks fan. And for the same reason, a great follow on Twitter, at CMikeSpinMove. Griff, thanks so much for joining. How are you doing?
Doing all right. Thanks for having me. I've been a follower of yours too for a while. And I really enjoy your work. So I'm excited to break down the Bucs Seahawks game here.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Yeah, let's get right into it. I mean, I think everybody's familiar with some of the big changes on the big change at quarterback. Though there have been some pretty big changes on defense too. Let's start on the offensive side of the ball. Before we really dive into Geno, how would you kind of describe the Seattle scheme? Like, what's kind of like the bird's eye view of it?
Well, the offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron, he comes from the current iteration of the Rams tree, McVay, the whole Shanahan deal, right? So of course the meat and potatoes of that is when they go into under center, a lot of outside zone, wide zone, a bunch of pocket play action and boots off of that, right? And then when you go into gun, you've got you're just going straight drop back. A lot of quick passing, not necessarily a lot of quick game. Kind of more just kind of those read it out, get to the open receiver, or backside digs, things like that. But full field concepts, and that's something that Seattle has transitioned more into this year. But Waldron does have his own take on it, and like with any team, you build around your quarterback, but it's very much the quarterback kind of feeding into what the scheme wants to be, irrespective of who's commanding it. So there's kind of this cool feedback loop that's going on. But yeah, Waldron does have his own take on it for sure, in contrast to McVay, Shanahan, LaFleur, even Arthur Smith, all those guys that are out there in the league right now. We're seeing, I think that the main thing that stands out from that bird's eye view you're talking about is the use of pistol. And really, like, the plays that follow from it are all just very common. It's more so hiding tendency and everything. But all in all, I mean, they're kind of running a fairly rank and file Shanahan McVay offense that we know. It's just customized for a little bit for Geno and having a guy like DK out on the perimeter, and of course Tyler Lockett.
So that's interesting. You said one of the main differences is pistol. Is that right? And
Right.
are there a couple of, well, maybe let's get into pistol, kind of like what that does for them. But I'm also curious if there are some other big differences or notable differences that you see.
Well, so in pistol, it's, of course, you've got, the quarterback is in shotgun, but you got the running back behind him, right? So from that, just that formation, because the running back isn't to the side of the quarterback, as far as the run possibilities are, the defense, as far as the defense is concerned, the run can go either direction. So you kind of have your full run menu open. You can run outside zone left or right, but by virtue of that, and if you put enough of those runs on tape, defenses are going to defend you as though, like, all right, they're in pistol. This is how we've got numbers on them. We're gonna present a kind of outside zone oriented defense. But then, by product of the quarterback being in shotgun, you can access your drop back passing game whenever you want, because teams aren't running drop back passing game in under center right now. So they've kind of found the way to bridge being able to run their gun drop back game paired with their under center run game, thus forcing defenses to defend the whole plate whenever they're in pistol. And then from there, like, they run all the same plays. It's just you can manipulate what personnel's on the field. You can manipulate how individual defenders are trying to key things, because so much of modern football is preying on the guy across from you also being really smart. So you're using their expectation against them. Like, everything's tendency building and then tendency breaking. So by being in pistol, you're hiding your tendency. They can't do any of that. So you're kind of just, you're taking whatever they're not defending pre-snap. For example, they run enough in pistol outside zone that they'll get cover 1 looks or cover 3 looks. but then DK's in a max split. So now if they have a check or they just call the play, you can now run a 5-step or 7-step go to DK Metcalf, and you don't have to worry about them clouding him or playing any sort of shell coverage. So it's just keeping their options open, and it's using formations and tendency to their advantage to take the load off the actual lines you draw on the page to draw up. So it's been this crafty little thing that they've done, but it's comprising about, I think, like 20% of their early down snaps.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's not like this gimmick. It's like a substantial thing. And they do ebb and flow out of it every week. Like some weeks it's more, some weeks it's less. But it's definitely a package that they're putting out there that they're really forcing defenses to think about.
Yeah, so it kind of sounds like they're able to get some of the same defensive looks that they would get from under center, but while having their quarterback in kind of like in gun, which is interesting because I don't know if it's still the case, but I know in some of those Goff years, the Rams, their shotgun pass run splits were way out of whack. It was like extremely pass heavy and when in gun. And, of course, that's going to shift your frequencies when you're under center. And whereas this Seattle offense, it just seems so well layered. I think I've only seen about 3.5 games of their offense on tape at this point, but it just seems like things are intentional. The order in which they're calling things, the way they're building plays off of each other, and they've had awesome results. I mean, they've roughly doubled their EPA per dropback from last season. Their neutral first down pass rate, and I really like splitting first down as opposed to just bunching early downs. Their
Sure.
first down pass rate has gone from 41% last year, which was 28th in the league, to 57% this year, which is the fourth highest in the league. So I think some might just look at that and go, hey, why couldn't you just throw more with Russell? Like, why are you now letting Geno just throw it? And is that why you're getting better results? Is there more to it? Is there a reason that they're able to throw more with Geno and that they weren't with Russ?
Yeah, I think there is, and it's more so related to styles than it is necessarily value. Like if you backed Pete Carroll in the corner, said you've been around so many quarterbacks as a defensive coordinator and as a head coach, college, the pros, and if you backed him in the corner and said who would you take, like the peak version of over anyone, I think he'd tell you Russell Wilson, maybe Carson Palmer. Granted that he had him in college, so it was a little different story. But I think he'd say Russell Wilson. But then I think in a perfect world, simultaneously, he'd rather have a higher run rate with Russ than he would with whoever the next and then the guy after that he would take of quarterbacks that he's been with. And it really comes down to style. And then ultimately, I guess style is, how good you are at the things you're good at and how bad you are at the things you're not so good at. In Russ's case, if you listed off the things that he's good at and listed off the things that Geno's good at, or rather here, let me phrase it differently. If you listed off the things that Russ is better at than Geno and then did the same for Geno compared to Russ, Geno's list would be longer. He checks off more boxes. It's just that the boxes that Russ checks off, he checks them off at such a degree that in the macro, at his peak self, you'd rather go with Russell Wilson. Now, at the same time, we maybe haven't necessarily seen peak Geno yet because that kind of becomes redefined every year. And he hasn't really played that many games. So we really don't have that much data on him in the grand scheme of his entire NFL career, despite being 32. But the types of passes that Geno is good at or concepts are conducive toward high volume, doing a lot of them. Whereas the ones that Russ is good at aren't conducive toward doing high volume. You can't call 20 DK fades a game or 10 deep overs to lock it a game. With Geno, he will kind of nickel and dime you in the short area, and then he'll also take the chunk gauge in the intermediate. And you can do that repeatedly so that you can kind of have some high volume stability. Whereas with Wilson, if you call that many passes, you're still going to get, when he's healthy, 100%, right? And at least, I mean, Denver is its own situation at the moment, but looking back on Seattle's history, if you were to pass that much, yeah, you're still going to move the ball a lot, but you're going to have high variance. You're not going to necessarily be able to control what he's going to do. And a lot of how you scheme is predicated, of course, on the assumptions that you can make about what your quarterback will or won't do. So how can you, if he's doing his own thing more often than not, or more frequently than most quarterbacks would, how do you try to layer calls together over the course of a drive and then sequence drives over the course of a game. You kind of just have to drive a car in a certain direction and let him, take over the wheel once you get to your destination and hope for the best. And that works more often than not. But if you think about how offensive coordinators are meticulous over their game planning and pre-planning and how they want to sequence things, I think they would rather have a guy that will execute the play call as designed more often than not. That's what they're getting with Geno, and therefore it's just passing more is a little bit more justifiable. So it comes down to that. So really, not to get too long-winded here, when they did pass more with Russ in the years, because they certainly did, there was kind of an idea that it was only 2020 when they let Russ Cook move in. There were multiple years where they did go pass heavy. The numbers weren't necessarily that great when they did it, and there are caveats. Like it's all theory at this point. But he was injured in a couple of those years, like where at the end of the year it was reported he had a banged up shoulder. Nothing too bad, but that can still affect your throwing and all that, right? But when they did pass more, they refused to beef up the concepts that they are currently beefing up the offense with Geno. It's they're taking quick game and running it to an absurd rate. And then they're taking the shots and running it to an absurd rate, and then taking the play action concepts, taking those to an absurd rate. So they're taking the passes that he is good at on a relative sense, at least compared to the ones that he isn't. And they're running those at the highest rate they possibly can. And if you presented that concept spread, I think, to any offensive mind and said, can you build an offense, a high volume offense this way? They'd be like, where's this? Where's that? I mean, you're missing a whole bunch of stuff. So, and I think comes down to that right there is why Carroll's been hesitant for so long. With Geno, he may not check off every box at an elite level, but he checks off so many of them. They're like, yeah, we can do this. Yeah, we can do that. Now, it just so happens this year, he is just making every throw. So he kind of is checking those boxes off at the same time. So yeah, it's just, it really comes down to quarterback styles, and Geno's can execute the stuff that is easier to call a lot of, really. And I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to be long-winded. This is all about nerding out as much as we can. So, I mean, I think I've seen you make the argument and over the past couple of years on Twitter, back when Russ was still with the Seahawks, that basically with increasing that first down pass rate, the passes that you're adding, they're diminishing returns because of what you're saying. Like there's just certain type of passes that he's not going to execute at the level of maybe some of the other quarterbacks. And it sounds like those are kind of more like intermediate sort of concepts. Like, are there maybe a couple of concepts that stick out to you that they've really started to use a lot more now that you think might have been more of an issue for Russ?
We're seeing, people talk about middle of the field usage with him, right? And I think it's with Russ, it was the core problem is that he can't see over the line. I mean, he's even kind of alluded to that himself. Even Drew Brees, who's 6 foot flat, has said, I have blind spots when I'm working the pocket. I have to work myself back into lines of sight. I think that's a real thing with Russ. And then over time, combined with his propensity to scramble, which is a huge part of his game, it kind of reinforces or enables that, mentality of not trying to work to those sight lines because he hasn't needed to. But so when you can't access the middle of the field at a super frequent level, or at least you can't do it at a mode of like low effort, it's a very high effort thing for him to do when he does it. You were throwing out a lot of plays. I mean, that's where when we talk about like full field progressions or scan progressions, you have to work your eyes over the middle of the field, read those intermediate zone droppers.
That backside dig is going to be a big part of it.
Right. And like this past game, Geno got to the backside dig like 3 times against the Cardinals. So, I mean, it's really those 5-step drop, 7-step drop concepts where you're not just throwing something isolated to the perimeter, not just throwing a deep ball. You're going from 1 to 2 to 3, I mean, he'll even get to 5. So like when they face a defensive line that their offensive line is just outmatched by, I mean, they're not moving the ball, but he's getting all the way to his backside check down, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like the 49ers game, it was almost to a fault. I think part of that was their game plan wasn't their best of the season. Granted, it was only the second game of the season, but just to illustrate the point, he'll get through the whole thing. So, and then he'll scramble. Like he'll scramble after the progression has been exhausted. So it's more middle of the field concepts, more 5-step game. It's less quick game relatively. There are fewer shots for sure, because again, quarterback skill sets. With Russ, it's you don't have to take shots, you get to take shots, right? It can be a double-edged sword, but with Geno, it's while his numbers are great when going deep, he takes those shots when they're available within the concept. In the progression, they're not dialing it up for him as much. They're just kind of letting him take what's there. But yeah, it's really more like we're seeing more backside digs. They've ran, even quick game. There's more second level quick game. It's not just stick. There's stick nod. There's stick dig, stick glance, etc. So it's they're kind of operating more in that ballpark.
I'm laughing just because it's crazy how much. I mean, Russ seemed to love running stick over and over again. You still see it a ton in Denver.
Yeah.
And yeah, like honestly, just from watching what I have seen from Geno, I almost feel like his raw numbers almost undersell him. Like just because that's how good he's been. And it's not like a Jimmy G or Goff sort of situation where it's the scheme that's doing the heavy lifting. Like this, it's well designed. It's all those things for sure. But he's executing at such a high level, like all the fundamental parts of being a quarterback, the footwork, the way he lines himself up for throws, the way he gets through progressions. And he's making a lot of these throws in such tight pockets too, it seems like. Like I know the Seahawks offensive line is pretty good and they've hit on the tackles, but I mean he's not just standing there in clean pockets every time. Like there's a lot of situations where it's very like the space is very tight.
Agreed. And that's if you not that I recommend doing this, but if you just go back and watch some of his Jets highlights, and you can put highlights in quotes if you want, you watch him like he's unconscious in the pocket, and that can work for you or against you. It means that he's completely unaware to when the pocket is breaking down, but it also means that you're going to get the most out of the play when the protection does hold up, and he'll get downfield and he'll chuck the ball wherever it needs to go. Again, when he's with the Jets, sometimes forcing it too much. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing that holds to this day, but he's a product of being more experienced and everything. He's kind of balancing out when to get rid of the ball while still working the pocket. Like when he is taking sacks, it's because he's trying to make it all work, as opposed to, scrambling, running around when he shouldn't, missing a guy, things of that nature. But what he reminds me in the pocket is he kind of reminds me of a combination of like Ryan Tannehill and Matt Ryan. How they'll just hang in there forever, milk it for all they can, and they'll still, with their high release, still get the ball off with guys draped all over them. So, I mean, to the degree that he's doing this, I don't think it was predictable. Him operating at a high level was a possibility, and that's kind of, maybe I was being cowardly, but that was the phrasing I was using. Like, well, something better than what we know Geno to be over the offseason, I was saying, is possible. I just don't know if it will happen. I think even in my wildest dreams, couldn't foresee him playing to this degree. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. He's just operating at a crazy level. So
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there are a couple other things that stood out just with the offense as a whole. I think one of them was they used 3 tight ends, I think at the highest rate of the league, or they're definitely up there. Can you talk about kind of what they do out of that package, what that does for them, why they're using those 13 personnel packages so much?
Yeah, so it's yeah, for sure. They're using a lot of it. It's almost as recognizable as like their pistol usage of something that's super unique to them. I think it stems from they just like all 3 guys. Like they traded for Noah Fant, right? He's a talented dude. They had Will Disley, who's just kind of like the solid, run-of-the-mill wide tight end who can kind of do it all. He's not super crazy athletic, but he's really skilled, coordinated, all that, can block. And then they've got this other guy, a giraffe, Kobe Parkinson, who's 6'7", and they're not expecting a lot of him in this moment, but he has a skill set to where you think maybe he can be a receiving threat in a couple of years. So they like all 3 guys, but then also if they want to use them, it's really easy to build right out of that package when they're an under center. The under center outside zone game, right? You can because you're already an under center team and you can beef up, your packages however you want. So it lends itself toward that. And then of course you've got all the play actions off of it. So, when you have 13 personnel, often you've got one of the guys off the line, as even if they're part of the core, they're off the line. So one of them is, so that lends itself toward, doing those play action slide boots, right? Where you get the guy in the flat, for an easy access throw, but then they're running them on corner routes or banana routes, and hitting it there. You can run any one of them on the intermediate cross. So out of that package, they've ran pretty much their whole play action, under center play action menu, pocket play action, and outside on the move. So between those three guys, they've got skill set overlap, but then skill set diversity, so they can kind of be interchangeable. And maybe part of it is just the league forgot how to defend like the boot slide action. I don't know what's going on, but Seattle's hit like 20 of them this year. And they've used the play before, but I don't know what about it is so effective this year. It feels like cheating at times, but yeah, it's just a versatile package, I think. And it just follows from, that's where they've got like their third best player basically is a tight end. Like after their receivers, it's just all their best players are then tight ends as opposed to their third or fourth receiver. So I think it's just kind of, personnel optimization.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, besides the passing, in which can't really emphasize enough how well Geno's played. Fourth highest graded quarterback by PFF. There was a throw in the back shoulder to Metcalf against Arizona, which I think just exemplified so many of the things that we're talking about. But besides the passing game, they also have a really efficient running game. Just by yards per average, each of their running backs is doing so well. I think by EPA they're ninth, but overall it's like really efficient. What are they doing in the run game that's allowing them to have so much success?
They're running, they're calling out, they're trotting out all those run plays that like everyone else is running, right? Like the outside zone, wide zone. They're combining it with the jet motion and the split action and stuff like that. So they got all the misdirection going on. The blocking itself though has been fairly it's been fairly inconsistent, hit or miss. So, but their backs though, I feel like they've just been, when they had Rashad Penny, he went down, but he's a difference maker. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it really. He can just, when he hits the second level, he's probably one of the best running backs in the league. And then probably say the same for Ken Walker, the guy they drafted this past year in the second round. So I'd say Walker probably has a little bit more potential in getting to the second level than Penny. He's a little more crafty in the hole, can grind out the tougher yards. But when he hits the second level, I mean, he's just a difference maker. So if you look at their success rate's fairly low. So they're kind of feast or famine. But that's just for under center. Where it gets really interesting is when they go into gun, they are running way less when they're in gun this past year. And that kind of connects back to your earlier points about what they're doing in the passing game, and the passing be more sustainable. They feel like they don't need to put runs in their gun sample. And they think that Geno can just be an efficient, balanced passer, even though they're putting out a bunch of pass indicators. But because of that, and like you said, McVay, they became like, they went so far in the pass direction when they were in gun. They started to become really predictable. And then, not as an aside, McVay's response to that was, well, let's not help Goff out and run the ball a little bit. Let's just get a guy that can do it in spite of passing in 90% of the time in gun. And that's what they did with Stafford, and it worked for at least 1 year. But so in Seattle's case, they are still passing at an extraordinarily high rate in guns, like 80%, which is still like top 5. But when they are running, though, they've kind of abandoned the inside zone shotgun runs with Russ, and they've replaced it with like all these constraint, like gap counter, gap power runs and stuff. So because they're 80% pass, they'll get a pass rush oriented front. There'll be a huge bubble, opposite of the alignment to the running back. And they go, all right, well, let's just send 2 extra blockers that way and let Walker figure it out. And they've hit like 10 explosive runs off of GT counter this year, in shotgun. And they'll even Geno will check into runs against blitz looks out of it, because they'll pin someone down who's trying to get upfield and Walker's gone. So their gun run game is like purely a constraint. It's not like their meat and potatoes of their gun offense. It's not like foundational. They're just, all right, we're just going to have it in our back pocket to take advantage of bad looks, and it's just been really useful for them. So, yeah.
That point that you made about their drop back game, the fact that they're passing more out of gun now, it's getting them different or certain types of fronts that are creating big bubbles and allowing them to succeed with gap runs. Like, so that's really interesting. So what would be an example of some fronts that would be really oriented towards the pass game and therefore susceptible to gap scheme runs?
Sure. So if you think back to under center, and if you go under center and teams are thinking, okay, it's either outside zone or duo or play action. Like it's one of those three things. The meta right now defensively has come out in a bear or a tight front, or at least like loaded up, right? The interior gaps. So then when you go into gun, most teams, especially for the teams that just aren't running a lot, you'll see more even fronts. So you'll have a 1 technique, a 3 technique, and then 2 wide ends, So that means the B gap to the 1 technique side is just wide open. And even if they're gapped out, meaning, they got 8 in the box or they're matching every gap with the defender, it's still a hard fit for that linebacker that's stacked to that B gap. So Seattle's just thinking, well, okay, if they're going to present that look, we'll run on them, maybe get extra blockers there, like we said with the gap counter stuff. Not just for efficiency's sake, because there could be potentially an explosive run right there, but you're also you're imposing balance on the defense by making the defenders think twice a little bit by getting upfield. You're slowing them down a little bit. If you hit that once, the next time they come out in that same look, they're going to, all right, we got to be a little honest and read the keys and not jump the snap and all that stuff. So I don't know if a really robust data study would reflect like ball get off differences tied to run rates, and within certain fronts and certain down and distances. I don't know, but I feel like even though they're going the direction of wanting to pass a lot when they're in gun because they can, they're still squeezing everything they can out of the front or out of the formation to get balance in every situation. Because if you think about it, 90% pass rate, 80% pass rate is extremely imbalanced. So what balance can you get? So throw those constraint runs out there, but then from there, they're even willing to play action off of those constraint run looks. So I feel like, Pete Carroll talks about balance, but he's talking about balance this year where they're ranked like the 5th highest pass rate on early downs. So I think to him, it's saying we're just presenting to the defense that we can do anything at any point in any formation, regardless of what the game long tendencies reveal. So yeah, it's just them all tying it all together.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I don't want to quite jump ahead to the Bucs offense yet, but that made me think about one of the things that really helped the Bucs last year was kind of down the stretch. I think after their bye, they went to a more gun spread run game, and they under Arians and even now they have an extremely high gun pass rate. I think I checked a couple of games ago; they were the second highest, just behind the Rams, like high 80s.
Wow.
And but last year when they did go to that more spread to run, it was a lot of one back power. You saw some of that GT counter, like just all sorts of stuff. Like they really, as a whole, last year they had diversified their run game as opposed to 2020, which was just felt like duo and inside zone.
Right.
But I think that's the reasoning is probably very similar to the type of stuff you're talking about, where it's because of the certain fronts that you're that you're getting because you are dropping back so much. But yeah, so that's fascinating. I'm curious about. Feel free to take this either as maybe you want to talk about players or scheme. What are the things that this offense, the Seahawks offense, does best?
For all the talk I did about how like there's new concepts, reading the whole play out and stuff, getting to the open guy. The thing that's kind of funny about all of it is that really, to answer your question point blank, the thing that they're best at is still just the one-on-one isolation throws to their 2 best players, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So if they need a bucket, they'll go run a 12, 14 yard speed out, and they'll put their foot in the ground, get open. Geno will throw the ball before they've even, made their cut. And they caught the ball and they're tiptoeing on the sideline, and boom, first down. And it doesn't matter first, second, third down, no matter, what they're doing. It's just, all right, I guess we've got that. And then it was like week 3, they started hitting fade balls. And I'm sitting there on the couch thinking, they're going to hit fade balls in addition to everything else that is new to this offense. I don't know what the limit is here. So yeah, Geno Smith is dunking on corners 40 yards downfield with DK Metcalf, and he's hitting corner posts to Tyler Lockett 50 yards downfield against 2 high coverage. So it's just kind of what they're best at is what they've been best at. Now, Geno is being accurate, throwing confidently, etc. Shane Waldron's doing what he can do to get the looks conducive toward throwing those routes right. But part of it is, of course, whenever you've got DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, no matter who the quarterback is, you got to be able to go deep with those guys. So it's just the one-on-one highlight throws really is kind of what they're best at. I mean, there are still mismatch problems.
Right. Yeah. You're right. Like, especially when you get those receivers one-on-one on the outside, like there was a play against Arizona where Geno, he sees that it's a 0 pre-snap, changes the protection, gets it wadded up, and then hits a quick out. I can't remember who it was. It was on the left, to his left.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like a big splash play, but it was just like, man, like this guy is seeing everything. He is absolutely tuned in right now and just taking what the defense gives him, getting in the right looks, all that sort of stuff. About the point about the fade balls and the deep shots, are they still getting to those predominantly off of play action under center?
Well, they're accessing the post a little bit from under center, the deep overs and stuff. I think like McVay calls it like the high cross play, which is just a strong side flood where you've got an over coming from the weak side of the formation. But as far as like the go balls and the fade balls go, some of it just they're in gun or they're in pistol, right? And so they're getting that one high look. But then Geno will like a gun 3 drop and boom, he's hitting DK 40, 50 yards downfield. So it's just really when the looks are presenting themselves. Now they're not hitting them at the same rate as they did with Russ, of course, because Russ at his best is probably one of the 5 best deep ball throwers of all time. But with Geno, he's right now his numbers when throwing deep are about top 5 in the league right now. So they're doing it's still within the bounds of kind of what's conventional. But yeah, they're just taking the shots when they're there. They're not trying to force it per se. But yeah, it's definitely a feature of the offense.
Right on. And let's go the other way. What are some of the weaknesses of either the scheme or the talent?
I'd say that the weaknesses is that Geno has speaking specific to Geno, he's got kind of 2 wolves in him. Sometimes he'll try to force a look that he really likes. And he's been lucky a few times. He tries to throw the ball almost too perfectly, like too accurately, and the ball will die on him a little bit. He won't give the ball he's not trying to give the ball like a what am I trying to say here? He will risk a turnover worthy throw if it means increasing the chance of the completion, as opposed to decreasing the chance of a turnover worthy throw, but also decreasing the chance of a completion. Does that make sense? Like he'll
interesting. All right.
He'll like, whereas Russ could control his distance and his trajectory to where he could throw it. He could overthrow Tyler or underthrow him and know that Tyler will kind of make up the margin for error. And that's not Tyler carrying Russ. That's having a special relationship with your quarterback. Geno will try to throw the perfect ball that you could fathom in the situation. And by product of that, when you're not perfect, that ball can die on you a little bit and it can be intercepted. He doesn't throw a lot of arc on his throws. Like even his fade balls are fairly flat. So when he's throwing up the seam, when he's trying to throw a dig or something, guys can get under occasionally. And that's his main problem, is trying to manage being perfect with being, not necessarily risky, but just trying to, I guess risk is still the right word, managing risk versus reward. But then other times he'll just shut it down. Like, even if if there's a chance for the shell to take me to my alert and the concept where I can go deep when it's maybe not the main point of the play, he's not even thinking about it. And he is passed up some opportunities to go deep at in favor of hitting the check down or going for a lower read, and he'll take it. It's like, all right, they got 6-7 yards here, or even this one they got 8 or 9, but the post was open. So stuff like that. So that's kind of where it's kind of every time I watch his tape, every game I watch his tape, I go, even of his best games, I'm like, wow, he was really good, but he still has yet to have that perfect game, because he'll miss a couple things, or he'll try to play things a certain way, like I was just talking about. So it's kind of like in that ballpark. Schematically, they have I think that they sometimes, for all that we talked about of them getting more comprehensive in their drop back game, sometimes I feel like they need to lean more into that. Like, there are some game plans where I think it's more they're trying to protect their rookie tackles, ease into things, even though they're playing really promising. They're not finished products, so they'll do a little too much quick game, I think, or they'll do a little too much one-on-one stuff to keep it simple on the perimeter with DK or Tyler. And I think, man, just give them something juicy. Let them, like the 49ers game is my perfect example for this, because the best stuff they did was when they actually went into their 5-step game, their 7-step game. And I'm thinking, just trust them. If they get sacked, whatever, it's fine. Live with the results, because they were playing scared and they weren't moving the ball anyway. So I think it's Waldron maybe getting ahead of himself with matchups, and then Geno kind of trying to nail down on precisely what mode he wants to be in terms of aggression and conservatism. So
I know you're mostly talking about, I think, longer throws with that Geno point about trying to be perfectly accurate and maybe sometimes the ball dying on him. But do you think like the pick 6 from last week would be an example of that? I know it's a check down, but it was kind of lacking on the arc, and it was able to intercept it on a swing pass.
No, I agree. I mean, that's he even had another one in the end zone where he was throwing an RPO and he thought, well, I'll just teardrop this thing in. And it was like, that's probably a situation where he goes, if I miss, I'm going to miss high. That's probably where he probably wanted to do. Whereas he was throwing it as though he's throwing to DK on air where there's not a defender, and he's just going to put it right in the breadbasket. That's a situation where you can get picked. And he almost did. Then he made good on it and followed it up with a touchdown anyway on that drive. But it's just kind of an example of like, he has the arm talent to miss high if he wants to miss high. It's not like an arm strength problem. I feel like it's a deliberate choice to be like, I'm aware of the defender, but I'm going to act like he's not there, and I'm going to rifle it in there, and I trust DK to get it. So kind of that situation. He even though his interception rate and his turnover worthy throw rate is low, he probably has about 5 or 6 extra interceptions that they could have been caught on the year. So it's not a matter of him throwing things he shouldn't. It's how he's, I think, deliberately electing to choose to throw the ball. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I want to ask you about kind of how you might try to game plan against this offense, but maybe let's save that for when we're talking about the Bucs defense.
Sure.
Let's flip over to the other side of the ball for the Seahawks. I know when you think of Pete Carroll, at least in his tenure with the Seahawks, you think of cover 3 and kind of think of, okay, that's it. But I think that there have been a lot of changes on this side of the ball, right? I mean, from the Legion of Boom days to kind of more into what they were doing in recent years. I think it became more prominent in the recent years, the bear front stuff. And then going into this year, I think they even, you guys have mentioned they've changed their language, trying to into a more Fangio style. And now maybe flipping back a little bit to kind of what they're doing. Is that kind of an accurate summary, or could you maybe just give a more detailed overview of how this defense has transitioned over the last few years?
Sure. Yeah. Starting in 2020, they were still predominantly a cover 3 team, but they did transition to bear, basing out of bear. So they moved away from their reduced over and under fronts. And it was primarily to be able to defend better the increased usage league wide of, the under center stuff, right? The under center zone, outside zone. And then it made it easier on the linebackers, especially in cover 3, to leverage those play action crossers and all that stuff and flood the coverage as needed, because they could kind of
Actually,
play
before you continue,
Yeah,
can you just talk a little bit about why bear helps against those
sure.
type of under center runs?
Sure. So as you shrink the front or reduce the front down, as in put your defensive linemen closer toward the center, really. If you got, flanked by the center, there's two A gaps, and then by the guards, two B gaps. Those interior gaps are big points of conflict for, second level defenders, right? Because if they've got, if they've got an inside run fit, but then they need to go expand or get depth for their pass drops, you're pulling them in two different directions, literally. So by reducing the front, their primary gap is now being exchanged. Really, now they're out closer to the sideline now, like physically. So that allows them really just kind of be more pass oriented defenders. So when you've got hard play action, outside zone taking you, say, one direction, and then it's play action, it's not a run. Now I need to hightail it to the other side of the field. If that backside, say it's cover 3 and you got two hook defenders, the front side hook defender might have the front side A gap, but then the backside hook defender has the backside C gap. So he physically does not have to run as far to be sound for his run gap. And then that means he can push to the opposite side of the field better. And it literally just becomes geometry. Like, it's just, you're exchanging gaps for the near defensive lineman and the linebacker, and it just lets them be closer to the guys they have to cover. And it really doesn't get any more simple than that. Seattle in 2020, they had a lot of problems, but they were like the second best play action defending defense, and they just repped the crap out of it. They didn't do anything but play bear and cover 3 behind it. And the final 8-9 games of the year, nobody could do anything to them, really. 2020, they retained the bear front, but they surprisingly scrapped the amount of cover 3 they play. They still play quite a bit of it, but they transitioned toward being like predominantly a 2-high team. A lot of cover 2 match zone, cover 6 match zone, not a lot of quarters, pure quarters anyway. And that was to kind of help take the air out of those in-breaking routes, like, Stafford, right, was in Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods. We're lighting the whole league on fire with all that stuff, right? And of course, as you know, the Bucs were and stuff. So it's just trying to find ways to match those concepts better, to be better spaced for it. And the reason why you retain your bear front or tight front, whatever the case may be, for Seattle it was predominantly bear. It's so that you can divert resources, have your defensive line be more run oriented, so that your back seven can be more pass oriented on average. And it worked for them when they kind of tweaked things around week 6 last year. They ended up becoming much better defending at the second and third level. They still had issues with the check down. And then they ended up firing Ken Norton Jr., making an in-house promotion. And then with Clint Hurt becoming the DC, he was elevated from defensive line. And then they bring in Sean Desai, who has background with Vic Fangio, and they bring in Carl Scott, who of course came from Alabama under Nick Saban. Then he spent time with Mike Zimmer. Both those guys, they both love cover 3, but they also really like, match quarters, whether it be man match or zone match. In Zimmer's case, zone match. So they bring in Carl Scott, and there's all indications are not only they're going to keep doing what they did in 2021, but they're going to try to beef it up and get the guys with familiarity with the system to coach it. And the first 5-6 weeks, they fall flat on their face this year in doing so. And then they tweak things, and from a bird's eye view, so to say, everything looks kind of the same, but the devil's always in the details. So they tweaked things and essentially reverted back to what worked for them schematically last year. And then they've got a little bit more talent in a few different places this year, and the results are slightly better this year at the same time as last year. So yeah, they're living in that 2-high world. They're playing odd fronts. They've got their change up calls, and it's definitely Pete Carroll's take on the Fangio stuff. But so it's definitely still kind of, there's some Carrollness to it, but it's definitely them embracing kind of what the modern football is calling for.
Is the way that they're playing cover three different now too? I think I might have misheard, but I think you guys have talked about like playing more Rip Liz now.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Yeah. So in the past, the simplest way to explain it is if it's cover three and you got a 2-by-2 formation, two receivers on each side of the ball, Seattle would rotate the strong safety down to one seam and he would match that seam. Then they'd spot drop the other side.
Soft
And
sky, right?
yeah, right. Soft sky. And then that other side, even though it's spot drop, they still have like principles of how to match your drops to the pattern and everything. It was actually pretty elaborate. It kind of achieved the need of matching both seams, I would argue. But this year they're absolutely matching with both overhangs. So they're matching both seams now. Um, and then that has a downstream effect where the hook defenders, they have different landmarks and they're keying things differently. But yeah, it's there. They've leaned all the way into how Sean Desai has coached cover three, and how Carl Scott's coached it as well. So it is a little bit of a uncharted territory for Pete Carroll. I don't think Pete Carroll actually cares. I think he really thinks X and O's don't matter that much, or at least nitty gritty details from where he's standing, just so long as you execute whatever you go out for, whatever you call out there. But it's definitely jarring if you're someone that's paid attention to the Seahawks defense and their brand of cover three over the years to see it so differently. But it's working for him in the moment, so I'm not complaining.
Yeah, I don't watch college football at all, but I think I've read before about people or somebody's written about how at USC it was mostly a too high defense, wasn't it? Like it was pretty different, or at least pretty different from what they do in Seattle in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
And even in, like you mentioned, in the last few years, it's been really adaptable. I think he's kind of had the reputation of maybe being a bit of a stubborn, old school kind of guy, to at least to people outside of Seattle.
sure.
But I mean, I think he's proven time after time again that that's not the case. I mean, especially more. I think the easiest place to notice it is on offense for all the reasons that we already talked about. But
Hmm.
yeah, like plenty of changes on defense. Well, I just wanted to ask you about just from the raw numbers. I noticed a big dip in cover two from last year and a spike, a pretty notable one in cover six. Is that just like your very typical Fangio style influence? Is that what that is?
So the first four weeks of the season, they almost issued completely with cover two in favor of more cover six and cover four. Um, and because that's what they want to do. They want to be able to play, with good corner technique and defend the sidelines with their corners, and then let their safeties kind of do damage, even though they're split, do more damage in the middle of the field, and take a load off the linebackers. And you can do that, by having a hard quarter safety. He can be really aggressive on a number two or a slot or whatever the case may be. Um, in Seattle's case, last year, I don't know what the reason was. You could kind of approach it from a few different angles. They used too high usage the same amount as Fangio Group, but they just replaced cover four with cover two. They did do quite a bit of cover six, but you're right. This year they're doing more cover six, but around 3 weeks ago when they started to make tweaks, actually about a month ago, their cover two usage is starting to increase, increase again. So I don't know what it is, why they prefer that. So it doesn't seem like a receiver specific thing, or like they want to cloud a guy. I think it's just, really it might be because the way they play cover two, um, they have that near curl defender. They kind of match with that guy, right? They call it the vertical hook defender. So they really weaponize that guy, whoever it is, a nickel or a linebacker, and they want them running with dudes. So I feel like their way of saying, hey, we really want double coverage on a slot corner or a slot receiver. Whereas Carl Scott, where he comes from, he might say, well, we'll play a bracket or something like that, right? Cover seven switch, whatever the case may be. The stock answer, I feel like, for a match zone team is to just kind of is really just to use that technique in cover two. And therefore, if you want that technique, you have to call cover two because that's where they've installed it. So it's like, hey, we want this guy carrying. We're not going to call two man on 1st and 10. So we're going to call cover two match zone here. And that's how they handle certain problems. I'm not sure, but yeah, they are using more cover six. and they still are using more cover 4 even still. But yeah, they are switching things around a bit for sure.
When you're talking about doubling the slot receiver on the cover 2 side, I'm just trying to make sure I'm visualizing this correctly.
Sure.
Would it be with like that, the linebacker there, and doubling with the safety on that side?
Yeah, so I'm being a little fast and loose with my double coverage um, phrasing there. But so yeah, you've got a safety on top. So right, so he's going to be defending. I mean, really, when you're playing cover 2, you're trying to get double coverage on that number 1 receiver, right, out on the perimeter. But they still have to react if they get a seam from number 2, right, or a fade from number 2. So if you've got a guy carrying with inside leverage from the curl, you still have that safety help over the top, so you can still kind of leverage to that guy. So it's not as tight of double coverage in the seam as you would get if you were playing quarters. It's just that they don't have cover 7 bracket installed, right? So for example, so it's like, oh, we have a slot problem, we're going to play cover 2 to that side. And if they're facing a team that will form slot formations on both sides of the ball, you have to call cover 2 to both sides. Whereas if it was 3-by-1 or say 2 back or 12 personnel, you'd feel fine playing quarters on the weak side to one receiving threat. So it might just be a formational thing, but yeah, that's I think that's the mentality there.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And just I want to make sure on the same page. Like when you're saying cover 7, is that like stubby?
Yeah, well, so cover 7, yeah, that's definitely one of them. Like cover 7 man match, so quarters with the individual techniques for player to player basis is quote unquote man as opposed to zone. In the NFL, you don't really see that except for some teams on third downs. It's just a pass specific like coverage tools that they want out there. Like I think Todd Bowles will do some of that on 3rd and 12. You know, he'll play stubby or stump versus trips formations, you know, things like that. He might bracket a guy. But like 1st and 10, the league doesn't really have a lot of tools for like, you know, double covering, like, you know, 2-by-2 spread, you know, 1st and 10 things out of quarters. So in fact, I think that's why Staley and Fangio, they play half quarter the way they do, where they play, it's cover 6, well, they call it cover 8, but they play the cover 2 side of the passing strength because that's where your slot formation is. And if they're worried about not just number 3, but number 2 and number 1, they want to get double coverage in certain spots. I think they play cover 2 so that they can weaponize that vertical hook defender to carry the seam. And then, you know, the cover 2 safety can take care of the fade. The cloud corner can deal with outbreakers if they get a flood. And then that number 3, they're using a combination of the mic and that weak side safety, right? Playing the poach technique or whatever the case may be. So, yeah, I think that's actually because the league doesn't play cover 7. So they kind of have to play half quarter if they have a problem with the slot receiver. So, or you can just have peak Bobby Wagner and just have him carry everything. It doesn't matter, but there's only like 3 of those guys in the league at any one point. So got to adapt a little.
Makes sense. I mean, I was so tempted to continue picking your brain about this stuff, but I want to get a chance to talk about the Bucs with the time that we have left here. Let's start with the Bucs offense. Have you had much of a chance to watch the Bucs? And kind of curious, just what are your general thoughts?
I have watched a little bit, and I've noticed like there's just kind of general offensive output problems at the moment for them. But anytime I watch them, I'm like, oh, yep, that looks like Tom Brady. All right, he's getting the ball out. He's still ripping it. I don't see any him slowing down. I don't see any of that. What I have noticed though is, and this is where I would ask you if it's related to injuries on the offensive line. I know the center's out, but the average depth of target has come down. But it doesn't seem like it's because Tom can't push the ball downfield anymore. I wonder if are concepts not popping downfield and he has to check it down, or is the protection not giving him time and he feels like he has to preempt stuff there? Because he's a machine, as you know, he'll get the ball out no matter what. But you know, looking at their more advanced metrics, they're still like top, like around 10ish in terms of efficiency. So I mean, I'm wondering, like, I feel like this team could, the offense could put it together at any point and put 40 on a team. Like, they have the capacity for that. So I'd be curious, like, what is your explanation for why it seems like they're not getting the output they normally do?
Yeah, I think it's basically in a piece I wrote somewhat recently. I kind of described it as like an intertwined mess where everything is making everything else worse.
Sure.
So at the beginning of the season, um, yeah, like you mentioned, they have their backup center, Robert Hainsey, in there. The bigger problem was at left guard. They started the season with Luke Gedeke, and
Hmm.
he was, I mean, it was really bad, like losing rep after rep. I mean, if you watch the Atlanta game, it's crazy what Grady Jarrett did, like literally winning like 5, 6 reps in a row before Luke
Yeah.
Gadicki could just get like a, not even a win, just like an even rep, let's just say.
Sure.
And now since the Ravens game, so that was last game for the Bucs. Nick Levert's been playing, or Leverett, I can never remember how to pronounce his name, and he's been a huge upgrade. He's playing like at least like around average, maybe even a little better. And but I think what happened was, so or one of the things that happened was very early on, Brady calibrated his like his internal clock differently. Like it just,
Hmm.
and he had to. That was absolutely the right decision. And there were a ton of throws where he's just mucking it immediately or mucking it very quickly. And honestly, I think an average quarterback would have in those early handful of weeks taken a ton of sacks, whereas the Bucs are still very low in sack rate.
Sure.
Um, but I think he has struck, and I think the Ravens game was by far his worst game, Brady's worst game of the season. Even though I don't think statistically it was bad at all. I think just from watching the tape, it was really bad. And I think a part of it was because struggling to recalibrate, and it
Hmm.
was apparent. I mean, I know they took a couple of sacks, but overall, on a snap by snap basis, it was apparent how much better his offensive line was playing. But he was still playing as if he has Luke Gedeke there, and
Right.
he's not really going through his reads necessarily the way that he could or should. Um, and and just, I mean, I know I'm talking about Brady here. And while I certainly don't think, I think he's very, very low on their list of problems, I do still want to point out those issues. And I also want to point out the issue that I think while at the top end, he is still, there's not like a throw that you can really point to from 10 years ago and say he can't make that throw anymore.
Right.
But where I've seen like a very, very slow decline over the last, I would say 4 or 5 years, is one in down to down consistency, where, there are just throws previously where he's going to make it 90% of the time, and that's dwindled down to 85, maybe 80%. And like, so he's just missing some throws a little bit more
Right.
often. But the other thing is, and where there's been a much bigger decline, is the pocket presence. I thought it was really noticeable in 2020, like in terms of, like he's so famous for those lateral pocket movements and climbing in the pocket, drop
Right.
back, slide, climb, throw. But in 2020, he was like an absolute statue. And then in the offseason after that, he got knee surgery, which to me, I think might be the reason why in 2021 you actually saw a noticeable uptick in terms of how much he was moving in the pocket. Still not where it was 10 years ago, but now this year, that's kind of come down again, and it's hard to exactly pinpoint why. I think part of it is just how much the line has struggled. I mean, if your interior pocket is collapsing, there's just nowhere to climb.
Right.
But he's also, the thing that, I mean, it's so noticeable when you watch old tape of his is he would, while he was moving in the pocket, he would always keep his base so steady,
Yeah.
and it would, like, so he's always ready to throw even as he's moving. Like, he's just got such a steady base, and I think it allowed him to get into late window throws that a lot of, or like the very elite quarterbacks otherwise get to out of structure and off platform. So
Right.
obviously he's still not getting to all the throws that Mahomes can make. I'm not saying that, but he can get to some of those throws in structure because of how good he's climbing and sliding, and while
Right.
still maintaining his balance. But that aside, so I think that definitely, of course, affects your deep game. I think the other part of it is Evans and Godwin have kind of had their struggles. Like,
Mm.
Godwin is coming off of a pretty bad injury. He's not. I mean, he's more of their underneath slot guy anyway, but he's not really breaking out of cuts the same way he was. Evans can get taken out at times because he is very much a like vertical stem receiver. It's going to be the
Sure.
big comebacks, the hinges, the fades. But I mean, at times teams just cloud to his side, and then which has always been historically the Bucs have been like, okay, that's totally fine. You want to play 2-over-1 while we're in our 3-by-1 sets, and you want to take out Evans that way. That's completely fine. We're going to work Godwin underneath on the trip side. Now
Right.
that advantage is starting to go away. Now teams are able to kind of play differently. They don't have to really respect their receivers the same way. And then finally, so many of those big shots came off of play action. They've always been close to the bottom of the league in play action usage, but it's down even more this year. And even though I think we have numbers that suggest, at least to a certain degree otherwise, that you don't necessarily need to run the ball well to use play action for it to be effective, it's very clear that Leftwich and this regime does think that way.
Right.
And their play action usage has always been correlated with the success of their run game. So anyway, that's my
Yeah.
my very long-winded answer as to why they're not throwing deep
No,
as much.
that's the perfect, most, qualitative, clarifying answer anyone could hope for. It's funny how, I loved how you said a bunch of things like negatively reinforcing each other, because if you can flip any one of those variables, it can have then a positive downstream effect where it, can undo all that damage and reinforce it all positively. So, maybe like you said, now that the guard plays improved a little bit, you said,
A
and
lot.
a lot. Yeah. So there's that lag effect with Tom, but maybe he'll catch up and recalibrate. And then that will mean he's going to be getting the ball out further downfield and maybe not just be a little bit more perfect, like you were saying. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see how that affects in the matchup with Seattle. Seattle doesn't have like a stud pass rusher. It's like every individual is like doing like mildly above average. It's maybe one guy doing a lot better, probably Uchenna Nwosu. But they don't really have a weak link per se, and no matter the front, which is surprising me because they're all playing, I think, above. They're all probably playing at career highs, which isn't saying much, but it still points out. So I wonder how that matchup will influence things. Yeah, so that's interesting. I'm surprised to hear that Evans is having a bit of a down year. That Godwin makes sense with the injury, but is he banged up, or is it just kind of?
So Evans actually, he's the first handful of games of the season, he was playing really well. It's been
Yeah.
more the last couple. I don't know exactly why. I mean, last game he had a few really bad drops. Even the Baltimore game, he had a great stat line, but there were plays there that he absolutely should have made where he didn't. It could be injuries. I mean, it's always hard to tell with him. It feels like every game he misses at least one series. Like that's been kind of like the running joke amongst Bucs fans for years. It's like you always
Yeah.
just sort of see him limp off, and then he's back shortly thereafter. I think last game against the Rams, very early on, he caught like a really tight window throw over the middle, and he just kind of got hit in the hip in a really tough way, and I think that might have affected him. But overall, I mean, I don't really think it's like it's way too early to say that it's like a decline. I think it's maybe just been some negative variance or something like that.
Sure.
But as far as the offensive line, like I actually think pass pro wise, they're pretty solid. Their left tackle Donovan Smith is definitely playing like a step below where he has been the last couple of years. So maybe that's something Seattle can attack.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm curious. Like, where was there? I'm curious about how you would try to maybe from a high level, or if you feel like getting into more detail, feel free to get to how you would maybe approach this from a game planning perspective for both the Bucs offense and the Seattle defense.
Sure. I think anytime you go and even if there's some struggles there, you identify Evans as your primary threat, and you have to decide how you're going to handle that. So naturally, that means like the most common tool as well. It's a big guy on the perimeter. Let's cloud him, right? And like you were saying, they're cool. They're chilling if you cloud Evans, especially when he's isolated, because we'll work the strength of the formation. So my question is Seattle going to feel compelled to stay clouded on him? Surprisingly, last week I thought they would play a lot more cover two, the Hopkins side. They when they played the Cardinals, and they were almost arrogant in the lack of cover two that they played, and even the single high usage that they played. and they just kind of trusted Tariq Woolen. And even though Tariq Woolen, he's a rookie corner for Seattle, he's really promising. I don't care how promising a rookie is, they're still a rookie, and Hopkins is still whatever year vet that he is. And, when he's full go, top 5 receiver in the league, right? I mean, I pretty much feel the same way about Evans. He's right up there. I mean, he's just one of the monsters in the league. So I would help out any rookie, no matter how good they are, with Mike Evans. So from there's a downstream effect. That means if you're going to play cover 2 weak and he's weak, that means you can't play. You probably feel more inclined to play more quarters front side. And if you're playing quarters front side, then that kind of gives Godwin a little bit more room to run around a little bit. And that's where, that means you don't have a guy matching him in the seam. That means that curl defender is really a flat defender now. And the Mike has to be really alert for those inbreakers. And that space, that window, Tom Brady is, as you know, is going to rifle that in there. Even if it doesn't look open, he's going to do it anyway. And I don't know how he's putting the drive on the ball that he is at 45, 6, whatever he is, but he's still doing it. And then if you want to play half quarter, play cover 2 of the front side, and you trust Woolen on the outside. They're going to manipulate the formation and just start throwing those weak glances, right? Those weak digs and stuff. And Tom threw 4 of those against the Rams last week, right? Or whatever it was, just hitting them at will. Even though I think they didn't score on every drive, where they were still moving the ball when they were hitting those. So Seattle's got conundrums no matter what. I think really though, in spite of all that, what's interesting about Seattle's defense, and like just to put in perspective, like how good they've been the last month, I think they're like the second best defense by DVOA over the past 4 weeks, and like second in EPA. Now, I'm not crowning them the second best defense in the league, but it just kind of illustrates the point. They're doing really well. But within that, they're still like a bottom 10 team defending running backs or defending the check down, or however you want to look at that. You can look at it running backs or on targets under 5 air yards, etc. But then they're defending the second and third level really well. And they faced some pretty good receivers over that time. Tom Brady, of course, is checking the ball down or hitting the lower reads at will, right? So it's kind of, is it currently I don't want to call it the Bucs' strength, but a feature of the Bucs passing game, right? Against perhaps Seattle's weakness. That's a huge problem that they have. But on the flip side, are they, because that they do go low just out of virtue of that being their game plan sometimes, does Seattle over defend and pack it in the lower zones? So it's kind of a cat and mouse game. Like, I don't think Seattle has a problem defending running backs because of like a skill set problem. It's more of a downstream effect of their collective structure kind of yielding that. So it's still something that they're going to have to be alert for. So it could be yards after the catch and the underneath that really determines this game, at least for the Bucs offense and Seattle's defense is concerned. By virtue of that, do they play more cover 3, more rip Liz, which they've been good in, so they can be a little bit more aggressive at all 3 levels, but then you're giving Tom Brady one-on-one looks. He might float, a sluggo to Mike Evans over Tariq Woolen's eyes, or, even to Godwin on whoever's defending him, right? So like just even with Godwin struggling a little bit, I think he's a mismatch problem for Seattle's nickel in one-on-one match coverage. So when you're in rip Liz, Kobe Bryant is a promising rookie, but he's not the best at squeezing inbreakers and stuff. So I can still foresee Godwin winning the day there if they give them enough one-on-one opportunities. So Seattle's got a conundrum in how they want to balance that out. Do they want to try to defend all 3 levels on paper, but at the expense of working them into mismatch problems? Or do they just want to play sound coverage, get double coverage at the second and third levels, make sure you can kind of disperse responsibility on those big name receivers, and then just rally for the check down and hope you make the tackle? So I don't know how it's going to go. I do think I can give you one thing that I think that will be a feature this game. I actually do foresee a lot of cover 3, but a lot of drop 8 cover 3 to get extra bodies into those windows, because that's a tool that Seattle loves to use, dropping an extra outside linebacker, even a defensive tackle every so often to just kind of obfuscate those quick game windows, those check down windows. So yeah, we'll see where the dust settles on that. But I'm going into this game with trepidation on that front.
Yeah, I definitely love the drop eight take. That's whether it be cover three or even like two high coverages. I would definitely test him with a lot of drop eight because I don't think Brady's really going to punish you by hanging in the pocket all day, and really giving his receivers a lot of time. I mean, I'm sure he'll adjust a bit, but handful of other things. I mean, I was surprised last week by how, I mean, I don't think the Rams ever clouded to Evans' side, whereas in the last year's playoff game, they did. They mixed it in a handful, not a ton,
Interesting.
but instead they trusted Ramsey to handle Evans one-on-one outside, which is okay.
Mhm.
That's fair. Like you have Jalen
Yeah.
Ramsey, that makes sense. Um, I wouldn't, but yeah, if you were to cloud to Evans' side, and then you're kind of leaving Godwin one on one. I would be willing to test that a bit, like if Godwin's the three, just because like in the past, he's torched linebacker types, like if they're ever on him inside with like jerks, whips, those sort of
Sure.
routes.
Yeah.
But like at times, he's even struggled to separate against those type of bodies. But where he's always very strong, Godwin, is he runs like one of the features of the Bucs offense is they run a ton of strong side choice routes. And it's always
Yeah.
Godwin on those strong side choice routes. And he reads things perfectly. He'll find the gap. He and Brady are always on the same page. So if you let them dink and dunk underneath, they will. But
Yeah.
right now, just based off what I've seen right now, I would, as a defense, I would definitely test Godwin. Hey, if you're playing tight, can you actually consistently beat your matchup one on one? I don't want to be too greedy with your time, but maybe if it's all right, let's go into the other side of the ball a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. No. I'm all for it. So
All right, cool. Yeah. So Bucks defense. Like kind of ask you the same question. What are sort of your initial impressions?
Um, so I was watching them a little bit, and it's still kind of all the familiar like Todd Bowles notes that I see on there. Every year he kind of ebbs and flows a little bit more of this, a little bit less of that, but it's still like his defense, right? Um, I noticed against the Rams, I saw, and maybe the actual numbers bear it out differently, but how when you watch something, it imprints on your mind differently than maybe what reality actually is. Saw a little bit more cover three than I had thought that I was expecting. And I was curious why that was, because you don't want to give a lot of one high looks to Stafford and Cup. But Bowles, he likes to disguise things and kind of drop into spot drop zones off of a disguise, and the disguise often works. And then in pure passing situations, that's when he really whips out the like the too high combo coverages and stuff. Is that pretty much, is that kind of defining him at the moment?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. He's always played a ton of cover three, and just he's loved sending those fire zone
Right.
blitzes. This year, the biggest changes have been he's really toned down the blitzing a lot. Like I think it was in the low 40s last year, and
Yeah.
it's come down to a way more normal number. And the other thing he's doing a lot more is giving those too high looks pre and then rotating down from them. And then, yeah, like you're saying, especially in the passing down, sticking to more too high looks. I was surprised as well by, well, I wasn't necessarily surprised by how much cover three they played against the Rams, but the thing that frustrates me so much is that they don't have either seam carry. Like it's
Yeah.
crazy. And that's what happened on that Cooper Cup touchdown. It's
Yeah.
basically like a four verts type concept. Neither seam carries, and he's just wide open because the free safety is just in total conflict. The exact same thing happened on almost the exact same concept in last year's playoff game, except it
Right.
was Higbee in the seam. Higbee wide open. I think it might have even been the first drive of the game. Same concept, same coverage. No one carries the seam. So I mean, yeah, it's pretty confusing. I'm sorry, I might have missed your question and not
No,
ended up
no, no,
answering.
no. We're just rattling things off at the moment, which is how we is the right way to do it. But I mean, all that said, though, I mean, the big picture is working. I mean, the Bucs are one of the best defenses in the league right now.
Yeah.
So and there's a lot of talent there, and I feel like the talent's being put in the right places. But like good and not that bad, but good and bad. Like there's still very like bullsy things going on here, kind of like what you're talking about. But he's willing to bank on his disguises working by playing with what the offense is expecting and then giving a different look. Um, So I guess it'll come down to, will Geno be able to pick that out? They have been spending a lot of time at the line of scrimmage, getting the play in early so that he can spend a lot of time undressing the defense and getting into the right checks and stuff. So that cat and mouse game will be really interesting to watch play out between Bowles and Geno, really. Those two brainiacs. Because Geno, he likes to mess around. He likes to screw around with the line. It reminds you of some names sometimes watching him. I won't say them, but
You're scared to go there.
Yeah. But
He's earned it though.
I mean, the way he's playing right now, yeah. But so that will be a fun matchup. When they do get cover 3, I mean, they got to fire their shot. They got to hit DK down the sideline, or at least go for it. I mean, that has to be part of your process anyway. Every week I say, I feel like the past 4 weeks I'm like, oh, this will be like a super heavy pistol game. It's being prophesied, it's, et cetera. And of course they just kind of do their usual thing. But I feel like if they're getting a lot of one high looks, at least more than you might think, they really don't need to use a lot of pistols. So it might just be kind of a very cut and dry, gun drop back with the occasional, one back power counter run, and then just more under center and under center play action, under center runs. So, I mean, I feel like this game could come down to just winning one-on-one matchups, and everything else will just kind of be dink and dunk. Yeah. So beyond that, I'm not really sure. Like you said, there isn't a lot of not as many like fire zones and blitzing is way toned down. I did notice them showing pressure a lot. Is that still a feature, and then dropping out of it?
Oh yeah, it's still Todd Bowles after all.
Right,
So
for
definitely
sure.
showing all those sorts of funky looks. Another big change I just wanted to point out is in the last couple of years, they really wanted to stay in base on early downs. Even if you're an 11, they would just play base. They would give 5 down looks, like a lot of those bear fronts and that type of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
they've moved away from that a lot this year. They match personnel more on early downs. It's more even fronts, and you've seen how that's hurt them in the run game. But overall, like you said, like still a really awesome defense. And I think you take that trade off, like to be a little worse against the run, to be not as easy to, like, I know statistically they had pretty good numbers, but it really felt like the smartest quarterbacks in the last previous years were at times able to pick them apart.
Yeah.
So I feel like for the Bucs' sake, like these changes they came at the right time to be playing against a quarterback like Geno, because I think he is going to be able to kind of figure it out pre-snap enough that, or like he's going to be able to be right enough of the time that he'll make you pay. But yeah, they definitely make it hard just with the looks. Like, I mean, sometimes I'm watching the tape, I'm like, I have no idea how you set the protection against this. Like, where
Right.
do you start?
Right.
um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's gonna be a great matchup. And I mean, I'm flipping back to the offense here, but I'm just gonna kick myself if I don't mention it. One thing that I would absolutely do against the Bucs is on first down or early downs in general, always give them 2 high looks, even if you're going to spin down from it. Because for the last
Mm.
couple of years, they will run the crap out of the ball if you do that, and they don't do it well, especially this year.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
like for instance, against the Rams, I mean, obviously the Rams, they 2 high every snap, at least
Yeah.
pre-snap. Excluding the 2-minute drill that they had at the end of the first half, they ran on 10 out of 11 first downs, and
Wow.
obviously they did not do it well. So
Right.
if you can just give them those looks, they'll keep pounding their head against the wall, and they'll end up in a ton of third downs. Which obviously it's still Brady. It's still tough to stop him on. I mean, not percentage wise, it's not, but overall, like
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
But you get them in enough third downs, they're not going to be able to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll be interesting. I'm really looking forward to the matchup.
So, all right, just one last thing before we get out of here. You got a prediction for us?
God, I'm such a coward when it comes to predictions too. Before I give anything square, it's gonna be like a low 20s, high teens score. I feel. I think it's gonna be a 1-score game. I think the Bucs are still a dangerous team, and I think they're trending in the right direction. I mean, people are writing them off, but they're only 1 game under 500. So, weak division and all that. So, I'm going to go Seattle's riding really high right now. They're a really balanced team. I think Seattle wins a one-score game. I think it's going to be like 21-17, and it's going to come down to the final drive, requiring a defensive stop with Tom in a potentially game-winning situation. So that's what I got, 21-17. But, see, this is a very losable, not a losable game for Seattle so much as it is a winnable game for Tampa Bay in spite of that. But yeah, that's my guess.
Yeah, that's a good prediction. I definitely am picking Seattle as well. I think I could see them. I don't know. I could definitely see it being low scoring. I think I'm going to go with 30-20 for Seattle. The Bucs explode on offense and put up 20 points finally. But yeah, Griff, thank you so much for your time. This has been awesome. Learned a ton. And it's been great talking football with you. And keep in touch.
Yeah, likewise, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. All right. See you, everybody.